Ladies and gentlemen, I am usual the game is Star Trek Online, and welcome to the Tribble Timewarp. I'm joined today by the ever-reliable Sir Boulevard. We're going to be doing some testing on the new Iconian goodies in a slightly more live-fire situation compared to the last episode. Starting on the ground, we're both going to be deploying the Iconian Resistance Pulse Wave. As you can see, this is, at the moment, a reskin of the standard anti-proton pulse wave. That may change. You'll see what the new skins look like later on, and I suspect it still needs to be altered. Now, Boulevard is running an engineer here, I'm running science, and as you can see, we're both pretty much bouncing off each other, although, admittedly, I have multiple heals stacked on my kits, so I'm actually going to do a lot better on this kind of exchange than he will, and he's seen sense and ducked for cover. We're also going to be looking quickly at the science module. You can see to my Alt 1 slot here, there it goes, that's it out. That is a modified version of Tachyon Harmonic. Does some radiation damage, a significant perception debuff, which is an interesting mechanic, but rather less damage to shields. To be honest, I'm not all that impressed by it at the moment. Again, we come out pretty much honours even in the exchange. I muck around in my chat for some reason, and then it's back to playing peekaboo around the corner while we wait for things to reload. Toddle, pop out some heals. As you can see, like most pulse waves, one-on-one it lacks killing power. I mean, eventually we end up, well, I end up running him out of heals, and we both end up popping our cooldowns, pull out the photonic pulse, whatever it is. He pulls out his shard of possibilities, I break line of sight, pull out my own, and pull out a polytrinic acid water for good measure. Yes, indeed. Because there is nothing that you can do about an enemy that can eat solid neutronium. And then it just turns into a pretty standard slugfest, which, it has to be said, he eventually loses. But you can see the kind of damage we're getting out of the pulse waves here. It's pretty standard stuff. This isn't what I call great PvP. Certainly I wouldn't claim to be anything other than a complete newbie at it, but we needed a controlled way of shooting each other up. And down he goes. So you can see the kind of damage numbers in the left-hand corner. I'm running a combat window. It's not great. STO doesn't have a live combat parser, and it would be really handy if it did. Right, double HP bar he's referring to. Actually, I didn't see it. Although if we skip ahead to the next fight, there is something odd about the HP bars that you do need to see. So, he tries to ambush me in the back, doesn't work. Now, if you look at his HUD display, you see that red icon in the top right hand corner. Normally what goes there is the difficulty indicator, and I'm wondering if that's a PvP thing, or if it's a bug that's crept in. Certainly looks out of place with the rest of the UI elements, and it used to be the case with player enemies that you had essentially 4.5 bars in that location, so I'm not sure if that's something that's crept in or if it's an early change that Cryptic are planning to make for PvP ground combat. I'm leaning towards bug, to be honest, because, as I say, really doesn't fit the rest of the UI. But we carry on exchanging fire and indeed photonic cone attacks, and very little else of note happens during this fight. The principal thing that needs to be highlighted here, if you haven't already spotted it earlier, is that weird red bar. Unfortunately, Sir Boulevard hadn't brought along the engineering module, the photonic barrier generator, so I switched over to my engineer and brought it with me. And then he dumped an orbital barrage straight onto it, so it's going to be a little hard to initially show you what it does, because he immediately frags it with the force of a starship's main weapon batteries. And then I ended up standing far too close to it. So, yes, it turns out that, like most generators, orbital barrages are in fact a viable counter to this generator, so we discovered that fairly quickly. We also discovered that as fun as it is against NPCs, a bat'leth really has its limitations these days. Pop down another generator and you get to see what it's doing a little more properly this time, once I remember to turn him away from it so he's not hitting it by accident. What you get is a field that generates approximately 250 to 300 temporary hit points every 3 seconds for anyone standing in its area effect. There is also a small bonus to damage resistance. I think something like plus 9.8, so really it's rounding error stuff. Doesn't stop him fragging me with one well-aimed shot, it has to be noted, but things get interesting later on, because I spawn right next to it, the barrier generator is still there, temporarily, and we can immediately re-engage. Again, give it a few seconds. The barrier does take a little while to pulse in, but I've got it. You can see my health bar has gone purple for temporary hit points, and off we go again. And I open with an auto barrage, and miss. Unfortunately, it's one of the problems of the old school style. He calls in a command bombing run, misses again. Some artillery, it has to be noted. And like any good Klingon, I pull out the Bat'leth. Then he pulls out the mortars and things start to get ugly. Mortars look like another good counter, since you can drop a salvo onto an area slightly larger than said barrier generator, so looks like the best counter to an engineer in Season 10 might well turn out to be another engineer. Certainly watch out for static AoE attacks. And he's being fairly generous with the artillery. Very generous with the artillery, in fact. I'm trying to remember if it saves him or not. No, it doesn't. Vaporized, like all good enemies of the Federation. We did turn up something interesting about temporary hit points, at least on the ground. I'd spotted that I seem to be going down a bit too easily for someone who is essentially getting a 25%, even 30% heal. Health, 40, 50% heal every 3 seconds. And as you can see, Boulevard's hitting me with a TR-116 to start with. He then switches to the AP shotgun just briefly, and then goes back to the 116. Now, if you watch my health bar, you can see that whenever I deploy the generator, I get 292 temporary hit points. So, watch what happens when I pop a generator down, and Boulevard starts shooting me with the TR-116. You can see that my regular health pool is dropping. The temporary health pool is unaffected. Shields are unaffected, but that's what you expect. 116 has 100% shield penetration. The temporary hit points, though, should those be counting as shields? Because it looks like they are at the moment, and indeed melee is going through it as well. Looks like kinetic and physical damage are ignoring temporary hit points. You can see there, he's beating me to death with a rifle butt, and 50% worth of temporary hit points are just sitting there going, nope, nothing to do with us, mate, pass the warlock. Anyhow, that turned up. Again, I'm not sure if it's a bug. I'm not sure if temporary hit points are meant to act like hit points and be affected by all kinds of damage, or whether they're meant to be essentially a second layer of shielding, in which case the name's a bit of a misnomer, and they can get bypassed by physical and kinetic damage as per usual. Again, not privy to Cryptic's design documents on this one, but just throwing that out there for observation's sake. Last but not least, we have the regular store-bought weapons. We've got, at least on the test server, dual pistols, stun pistols, sniper rifles, and pulse waves to play with. I imagine there'll be a full selection once this goes on to live. You can see the new model for the pistol as well as the sniper rifle. Interestingly, it's borrowed the 3-laser sniper shot model from the Dyson proton rifle. Damage is about what you'd expect, really. Nothing particularly special. Worth noting that these are radiant weapons, and as a consequence, oh, here comes the little barrage again, they're coming out in almost phasery gold rather than the red we've come to associate with anti-proton weaponry. I mean, you can see the yellow that we've got from the phaser barrage, you can see the yellowish that I'm getting from the AP weapons. Sniper rifle and stun pistol to start with, nothing particularly spectacular, as I say, and I actually go on to lose this fight, it has to be noted, mostly because I don't get much ground PvP time and even less than usual on tactical. I must admit my standard strategy is to fall over dramatically and respawn. Unless I'm a medic, in which case I just heal the damage and watch my opponents die of screaming frustration. We've also got the Radiant Pulse Wave, as well as dual pistols. Now, you'll look at the model for this one in a second and realise, there we go, that that's a relatively new model, and certainly I would imagine that the Iconian resistance pulse wave, which is currently using the old anti-proton skin and mesh, will be revamped to cover the new one instead. I sincerely hope it will, because otherwise it's going to look distinctly out of place. Unfortunately, I can't show the body armour. The tailor option appears to be tied to the missions rather than possession of the items, so nothing I can show initially. One of these days I will actually get around to logging in some missions on Tribble, particularly with the accelerated performance, but there we go. As it happens, I also needed to swap in the Iconian resistance pulse wave to get the 3-set bonus, as well as, well, just the 3-set bonus really. Anyhow, let's go find Boulevard again. Round and round we go. Where he is, well, we both know, because this is the room we tend to use whenever we're shooting each other for science. So, open up with the dual pistols. Again, very much the standard setup. So we've got the bolt spray, photon grenade, which has absolutely nothing to do with the regular set. There goes the secondary bolt spray, and out comes all the cooldowns, just enough to see what kind of damage I can get, as well as the security escort who just happened to be in there. Wham! That's one. 2 shots to get through his shields, and then mucho pain from the side. Yoink! Down he went like the proverbial sack of potatoes. The tactical module is a relatively almost bland option, really, compared to the other two. It's just a passive buff to your damage done, and a few other bits and pieces. I think it's like 15% extra damage done as radiation. So there's a fairly heavy degree of bypassing on most armors. There's very little that guards against radiation, but compared to particularly the engineering generator, I'd have to query its potency, at least once they get the whole melee and physical damage business fixed. The gold radiant motif carries on into the Iconian space set. We had a quick look at the visuals last time. Some people did suggest that it was Drozana's lighting. It really isn't. You'll be able to see the USS Rhea during this video, and it's got the same gold-yellow sun motif. Boulevard and I were speculating that this is a deliberate contrast between the shadow of the Iconians. Bear in mind, these guys are known as the Demons of Air of Darkness, so it's setting us up effectively as the Force of Light. Now, that's the Radiant Quantum Torpedo. He chucks out a great well. Those are the anti-proton beam arrays. Again, you can see we've got the yellow, almost phasery effects. So people who've been missing the orange gold of the phasers might find something a little palatable that here, as opposed to, say, green. It's my turn to play the crash test dummy on this one, so we'll just wait for the temporary hit points to run down, and then boom for the first time. A subsequent run showed up something interesting about the Radiant Quantum Torpedo. It has an arc effect that jumps damage to the 2 nearest viable targets. Now watch what happens when Boulevard fires a torpedo at me. You can see that I've got the initial kinetic hit, it's actually a critical, and then Arcing Quantum Torpedo spread 1 deals some more damage on top. So it looks as though the arc effect will jump to the initial target rather than one of the 2 nearest if there is no other valid target. And then it's more anti-proton beam arrays for fun. And for those of you wondering why I've got the shields, I deliberately taken my array out to speed up testing. We were having a look at the 3-set ordnance finishing move, and we ended up coming to the conclusion that it was basically essentially a free beam overload, more or less, which is handy in its way. We were getting damage numbers of between 12 and 16,000 depending on what buffs we had active when it was fired. And it's worth noting that Boulevard did not have any anti-proton consoles loaded, so I'd imagine you could probably take that past 20,000 without too much difficulty if you were in the mood. But, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty wraps up the major points from tonight's testing on Tribble. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, like, subscribe, spread the word, and until next time, farewell.